The Korean War was America's greatest military victory of the 20th century, a decisive triumph that crushed communism in Asia and brought lasting peace to the peninsula. Except all of that is complete rubbish. Today, we're diving into the forgotten war that killed over 3 million people, and what I'm about to tell you, most history classes leave out entirely. Because this war didn't end with victory parades. It didn't even end with a peace treaty. It just stopped. And North and South Korea? Still technically at war 72 years later. But wait until you hear about how this started. A temporary line that was never supposed to last. A surprise invasion that nearly succeeded. And a daring military operation so risky that experts called it suicide. Welcome back to the war. August 1945. World War II ends. Japan, which had occupied Korea since 1910, surrenders. And now, two superpowers are carving up the map. The United States and Soviet Union drew a line across Korea at the 38th parallel. It was supposed to be temporary, just an administrative boundary. The Soviets would handle Japanese surrender in the north, the Americans would take the south. Spoiler alert, it wasn't temporary. By 1948, Korea had fractured into two nations. The north established a communist state backed by Stalin. The south created a government backed by America. Two Koreas, two ideologies, one peninsula. But here's what most people miss. Both sides claimed to be the legitimate government of all of Korea. Both wanted reunification, and both were willing to fight for it. Stalin saw an opportunity. After Mao's communist revolution succeeded in China in 1949, the momentum was shifting. If North Korea conquered the South, it would be a massive victory for communism in Asia. So Stalin gave the North the green light. On June the 25th, 1950, North Korean forces, equipped with Soviet tanks and training, smashed across the 38th parallel with 135,000 troops. South Korean forces were caught completely off guard and crumbled within days. Seoul fell. Within weeks, North Korea controlled 90% of the peninsula. Was this the beginning of World War III? But you won't believe who entered the fight next. 21 nations, 3 million soldiers, and secret Soviet pilots fighting in disguise. Here is where things explode into chaos. This wasn't just North versus South. This became the first major proxy war of the Cold War, and it pulled in half of the world. 2 days after the invasion, the UN Security Council condemned North Korea. The Soviet Union could have vetoed this, but they boycotted the UN over a different issue. Huge mistake. The UN authorised military intervention. This created the UN Command. 21 nations sending troops. But let's be clear, 90% were American forces. General Douglas MacArthur took command. The US deployed hundreds of thousands of troops. South Korea mobilised over 125,000 initially. The UK, Canada, Australia, Turkey, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Greece, Colombia, Thailand, Ethiopia, the Philippines and New Zealand all sent forces. But the other side? That's where things get shocking. North Korea fielded the Korean People's Army, well trained, well equipped with Soviet weapons. Stalin provided arms, strategy and training. Soviet advisors were everywhere. Then came the game changer. October 1950, UN forces pushed deep into North Korea, approaching the Chinese border. and Mao Zedong made a decision that stunned the world. China entered the war. October 25th, 1950, the People's Volunteer Army crossed the Yalu River into North Korea. Not just a few divisions. China would rotate through 3 million personnel during this war. Waves upon waves of Chinese troops, often poorly equipped but numerically overwhelming. But wait, there's more. Declassified documents later revealed Soviet pilots flew MiG-15 fighter jets in combat against American planes, wearing Chinese or North Korean uniforms. The Soviets were fighting a covert war. So you had the United States, South Korea and UN allies versus North Korea, China and secretly the Soviet Union. The two nuclear superpowers fighting through proxies. And the battles that followed? One involved the most daring amphibious assault of the 20th century. Another became a frozen nightmare where frostbite was as deadly as bullets. Stay with me. By August 1950, South Korea was on the brink of annihilation. North Korean forces had pushed UN troops into a tiny pocket around the port of Busan. This was the last stand. If this line broke, the war was over. This later became called the Busan Perimeter. For weeks, desperate fighting held the perimeter, but MacArthur was planning something audacious, something that would change everything. September 15th, 1950, while North Korean forces focused on crushing Busan, MacArthur launched one of the riskiest amphibious assaults in military history. The target? Incheon, a port city near Seoul, deep behind enemy lines. Everything about this defied logic. The tides at Incheon were extreme. Ships had only a brief window to land or risked being stranded. The harbour was heavily defended. Military experts call it suicide. MacArthur called it genius. 75,000 UN troops aboard 261 vessels stormed Incheon. The North Koreans were caught completely off guard. Within days, UN forces recaptured Seoul and cut enemy supply lines. The troops besieging Busan were now trapped. UN forces in front and behind. UN casualties? Only 3,600. The Incheon landing completely reversed the war. By October, UN forces pushed into North Korea, capturing Pyongyang and racing towards the Chinese border. Victory seemed inevitable, and that's when everything fell apart. By late November 1950, 30,000 American and UN troops, primarily the US 1st Marine Division, advanced through frozen North Korean mountains near the Chosin Reservoir. The temperature? 36 degrees below. Then, out of the mountains, came 120,000 Chinese troops. The Chinese had infiltrated for weeks, hidden, moving only at night. Now they sprung the trap. The 30,000 UN troops were surrounded by a force 4 times their size, cut off. In sub-zero temperatures that froze weapons and morphine. What followed was a 17-day fighting withdrawal, one of the most brutal battles in military history. Hand-to-hand combat, frostbite as deadly as bullets. The casualties were horrific. UN forces, 1,029 killed, 4,582 wounded, 4,894 missing. Chinese casualties, 19,000 to 30,000 dead or wounded, many from the cold itself. Against all odds, UN forces broke through and reached the port of Hungnam for evacuation. By mid-1951, the war stabilised near the 38th parallel, right back where it started. The mobile war became a grinding stalemate, and the casualties? You won't believe the numbers. The scale of death was staggering. Nearly 5 million people, in 3 years lost their lives. And this wasn't just military casualties, but civilians too, caught in the crossfire, bombed, executed, starved. South Korea had nearly 1 million total casualties. North Korea, the same. For the United States, nearly 37,000 dead and 100,000 wounded. Britain lost 1,100. And for China, sources vary, with Western estimates of over 400,000 killed and 486,000 wounded. Nearly 1 million Chinese casualties. Even Mao Zedong's own son died in the American bombing raid. And the Soviet Union had around 300 personnel killed, mostly pilots shot down in their MiG-15s. Entire cities levelled, villages disappeared, families torn apart, relatives trapped on opposite sides of the DMZ for decades. And here's the tragic part. After all that death, all those millions of casualties, nobody won. Which brings us to the ending that wasn't really an ending. July 1953, representatives gathered to sign an armistice, not a peace treaty, a ceasefire. Negotiations had dragged on for years, but two things broke the deadlock. Stalin had died in March 1953, and President Eisenhower had hinted at using nuclear weapons. At 10 PM, July 27, 1953, the guns fell silent. A 4-kilometre demilitarised zone was established along the 38th parallel, the same line where this nightmare started. No victory, no defeat, just stalemate. To this day, 72 years later, North and South Korea are technically still at war. So what did 3 years accomplish? Korea remains divided. The Kim dynasty still rules the north. American troops are still stationed in South Korea. The Korean War didn't end communism. It didn't reunify Korea. It didn't bring peace. It just stopped. Remember that opening claim, that the Korean War was America's greatest victory. Now you know the truth. The Korean War was a brutal, grinding conflict that killed millions and achieved nothing close to victory for anyone. It was the first hot war of the Cold War, a preview of proxy conflicts for the next 4 decades. And the scariest part, the war never actually ended. It's just been on pause for 72 years. So will it ever end? Let us know in the comments. Now go check out our other playlists where we compare armies from around the world. Hi soldiers, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and leave your thoughts in the comments. And check out our merch and membership programs. And don't forget to check back in again soon. That's an order.